My husband and his family spent 8 months choreographing my exit, timed to detonate on our 11th anniversary, a milestone I thought we were celebrating. They miscalculated. What they didn't know was that I'd been laying quiet safeguards for 5 years, not because I expected betrayal, but because I learned early that love without boundaries invites harm. We met at East Lake State University, an HBCU in the Southeast. He was Khalil Porter, a calm, clever black man studying cybersecurity who could debug a server and make you laugh in the same breath. I majored in strategic communications, the student who organized panels, wrote the press blurbs, made the noise behind the scenes. We married young, I was 23, he was 26, and moved to Pinecrest, a tree-lined suburb where the sidewalks stayed busy with joggers and strollers. On paper, we had it good. I handled community outreach for a regional non-profit. Khalil freelanced in tech. We paid our bills, hosted cookouts, sent nieces birthday money, and did the Sunday phone calls. His family sat close. Too close. His mother, Opal, and his sisters, Taryn and Renee, were always within reach. The group text, the drop-ins, the advice that arrived like weather. At first, I found it warm. I grew up an only child. Their togetherness felt like a choir. But the longer I listened, the more I heard the harmonies bend. Compliments with a seam, glances that edited a room when I walked in, conversations that slid to a hush and then restarted with different words. I told myself it was just their style. 3 weeks ago, Khalil upgraded his phone and asked me to help migrate his data. While syncing to the cloud on our laptop, notifications tripped across the screen. I figured they were calendar pings or newsletters, until a preview line stopped me cold. Project Clean Slate, Zuri. My name. A chill ran under my skin. I opened the thread. It wasn't email. It was a Signal group chat titled Project Clean Slate with Opal, Taryn, Renee, and Khalil all talking like a planning committee. She has no clue, Taryn wrote. Riverbend Storage. Unit B, 37 is set. Movers at Thursday 3:45 while she's at work, Renee added. Attorney confirmed. Serve at the anniversary brunch, Opal chimed. She'll be out by 5:15. Khalil replied with a crying laugh emoji. 11 years with this freeloader. I should get a trophy. Freeloader. After more than a decade of birthdays and funerals, rent spreadsheets and late-night ramen, shared victories and dumb jokes, and they had me slotted as disposable. The plan was simple and mean. Move my things when I wasn't home, hand me divorce papers in front of an audience, and get my reaction recorded for social media. They even debated angles and lighting. Shock can be a thunderclap or a slow snow. For me, it settled like frost. But I didn't panic. I read back 8 months of messages, storage logistics, legal filings, cover stories, who would distract me and when, and 2 truths landed. They believed I was defenseless, and they were counting on me to shatter publicly. They were wrong. I closed the laptop, heart steadying like a drum finding tempo. For the next 20 days, I behaved as if nothing had changed. I kissed Khalil goodnight. I asked Opal about her church bazaar. I told Taryn her twist out looked fire and sent Renee a link to a grant she could share with her freelance clients. Meanwhile, I documented everything. Screenshots uploaded to 2 encrypted drives, hard copies printed at a shop across town, a timeline mapped in a notebook no one knew existed. I retained a lawyer they'd never heard of and quietly pulled my credit report, changed my PINs, and enabled alerts on accounts they didn't realize I monitored. All the while, they congratulated themselves in the chat. Little digital toasts I archived with the rest. The theme of my life shifted under my feet. This stopped being about how much humiliation a woman can absorb and started being about what a woman can protect when she chooses clarity over chaos. I wasn't auditioning for martyrdom. I was building a record. On Saturday, the day of their performance, Khalil played Sweetness. He made blueberry pancakes, poured my coffee just the way I liked it, kissed my temple like he used to before job interviews. It would have been convincing if I hadn't read the rehearsal notes. He buttoned a perfectly pressed shirt and announced he'd run a few errands for tonight. I told him I'd meet him later and watched him leave with the confidence of a man who believed he owned the script. He didn't notice that I had already written a different ending. When the door closed, I made my first formal move. I checked the project clean slate thread. They were buzzing, Taryn confirming times with the movers, Renee dropping a photo of the lock on Unit B37, Opal reporting, papers signed. She's done by dinner. They had no idea I'd already visited Riverbend the day before, swapped my belongings for a pile of junk tech and cracked lamps, and changed the lock under a new contract in my own name. If they opened that unit, all they'd find were dead keyboards, tangled cables, and air. At 4:50, Opal texted a photo in the chat, a manila envelope on the passenger seat of her car. "See you at the reveal," she wrote. I watched from our upstairs window as she pulled to the curb outside, jewelry neat, posture queen straight. The general arriving to bless her ambush. I wasn't afraid. Their trap was set. Mine was already in motion. At 5:05, Opal's sedan idled at the curb, hazard lights blinking like earrings. She stepped out in a cream suit, clutching that manila envelope the way a preacher holds a sermon. From the upstairs window, I watched her check her lipstick in the reflection, square her shoulders, and text the group, "Showtime." At 6:10, Khalil returned, cologne bright, smile brighter. "Ready for our big night?" he asked, all teeth and theater. "Let's make it memorable," I said, steady as a metronome. He didn't drive toward the restaurant he'd insisted on earlier in the week. He turned instead toward Maple Row, where Taryn's townhome sat with its curated patio lights and rented greenery. If there was any doubt left about the ambush, the address erased it. Inside, the set was built, Taryn with her phone already recording, Renee in a slip dress gripping a chilled bottle like a prop, Opal stepping forward with the envelope. A few cousins hovered in doorways, eyes bright with curiosity. Someone had cued a celebratory playlist. They were ready for spectacle. Before the first line of their script could be read, I lifted a hand. "Before you roll," I said, looking calmly into Taryn's lens, "you'll want to swing by Riverbend Storage, Unit B37. The room blinked. Taryn's camera drooped. Renee's fingers loosened on the bottle top. Opal's smile faltered by a millimeter, the kind of shift only a daughter-in-law who has learned her tells would notice. "Why?" Taryn asked, trying for board and landing on brittle. "Because whatever you thought you tucked away for me." I smiled. "It isn't there." Silence cracked. I took out my phone and opened Project Clean Slate. "Let's make sure the footage has context," I added, and began to read, not verbatim for their benefit, but precisely enough for mine. "She won't suspect a thing. B37 on Thursday at 3:45 while she's at work. Serve her at brunch, out by 5:15. 11 years with this freeloader. I let each phrase land, then scrolled. There's more. Timestamps, attachments, confirmations with movers, the attorney's draft. All backed up. Multiple places. The playlist kept chirping something triumphant and deeply out of tune with the moment. Cousins retreated. Renee's mouth worked, no sound. Taryn sputtered about privacy and boundaries, and how dare you. Opal reached for dignity like a shawl. Khalil stared at me, not furious, not apologetic, calculating. "This is illegal," Taryn said finally, voice rising. "Planning to steal and stage a public humiliation?" I tilted my head. "That is illegal. Documenting it. That's insurance." I slid my phone into my bag. "Here's what happens next," I said, still soft. "You all stop filming me. You stop transporting anything that belongs to me. You stop coordinating moves or reactions, or brunch ambushes. And you stop assuming I'm alone." No one moved. I turned to Khalil. "Walk me to the car." He hesitated half a breath, then obeyed, because even actors leave the stage when the set collapses. On the ride home, he gripped the wheel and pretended the road was interesting. I watched the city slide by and let the quiet say what I didn't. Sunday arrived like a held breath. The group chat went still. No good mornings, no winking updates. Opal didn't call. Taryn posted a cryptic quote about loyalty that earned a handful of pity hearts. Renee liked it twice from 2 different accounts. Inside our house, the air felt newly spacious, like furniture had been rearranged and the windows cleaned. I made tea. I backed up my backups. I sent my lawyer a neat bundle labeled Phase 1, Context. By Monday at 7:58 a.m., the quiet cracked. Khalil was already at the kitchen island, laptop open, eyes flat as screen light. Something in his posture said the show wasn't over. It was changing venues. At 8:11, the first email hit my inbox from work. Urgent. Emergency meeting at 10. At 8:24, my phone buzzed with a note from a donor I'd shepherded for years, suddenly exploring other options. At 8:37, another partner pressed pause. I didn't have proof yet, only pattern, but it smelled like Khalil. Only then did I understand the depth of his rehearsals. While I built a life, he'd been building levers. I closed my eyes for one long, measured breath, then opened my notebook to a fresh page and wrote a new header. By mid-morning, my desk phone and inbox were a percussion line. First a politely worded regret to inform you, from a long-time sponsor. Then a temporary pause, from a community partner we'd nurtured for years. A third note arrived from an agency director I'd helped through a crisis, now shopping for a more efficient provider. No names were mentioned, but the scent was unmistakable. Khalil. While I'd been curating town halls and youth arts nights, he'd been cultivating levers. Through a friend in the ecosystem, samples of his proposals reached me. Slick one-pagers offering web services, media management, and analytics bundled at a deep discount. The pitch referenced seamless continuity and trusted proximity, phrases I'd used in public briefs. He wasn't just undercutting. He was capitalizing on my language. I forwarded everything to my attorney with a clean header, Phase 2, Client Poach Evidence, and logged the sequence in my notebook. Documentation is not drama. It's oxygen. By early afternoon, my supervisor called an all-hands that felt like a verdict. Words like optics, conflict, reputation risk bobbed to the surface. I had brought award money to this organization, wrote the talking points that kept crises from turning into wildfires, trained interns who now ran small departments. None of that mattered in the glare of a rumor mill Khalil had aimed like a spotlight. HR escorted me through an offboarding that tried to sound humane. I kept my back straight, turned in my badge, and left with my box and my dignity. A job is a role. A record is a spine. I still had a spine. The signal thread, meanwhile, blinked back to life. Not the giddy volley from before, something more jagged. Taryn posted about housekeeping at work, with a string of annoyed emojis. Through a former colleague, I learned what housekeeping meant. Compliance had pulled her device logs. As a property manager for a luxury complex, she'd used company vehicles and staff time to coordinate Project Clean Slate. An investigation opened. Suspension followed. That wasn't my personal vendetta. That was policy she'd gambled against. Renee, who styled events on weekends, floated above drama by cultivating an image of effortless charm. I didn't name her. I didn't have to. On the local community board, I posted a short, factual consumer advisory. A cautionary tale about a vendor who tried to stage a public ambush at a family celebration, with screenshots of anonymous planning language, identifiers redacted, and a reminder to get contracts in writing with clear scope and behavior clauses. No tags, no insults, just context. By the next day, a ripple of cancellations moved through her calendar. Not everyone believes a warning, but enough do to choose safety. That's not cruelty. That's consequence. The crown of their little cabal, Opal, liked to purr about legacy. Her late husband's construction outfit, her network, the room she claimed to open. What the rooms didn't know. The company had not filed basic operational paperwork in several cycles while maintaining an active license. I submitted a formal inquiry to the state licensing board with copies of public filings and a measured question about compliance and claimed benefits. It wasn't a stunt. It was a citizen asking why everyone else has to follow rules, but some wave from the window and glide by. The inquiry triggered follow-up, state, then local. A process, not a spectacle. By midweek, the edges of their image began to fray in visible ways. The non-profit that had been my professional home cut ties with 2 sponsors. My former boss framed it as moving forward. I called my attorney again, updated the timeline, breathed. Taryn's suspension hardened, pending outcome, became pending consequences. Renee's feed shifted from confetti reels to taking limited bookings language that reads like retreat. And Opal, for whom life had always been an audience, went quiet. Quiet from someone who loves a stage is not peace. It's paperwork. Khalil moved through the house like a stranger on a tour he didn't want to take. He watched me watching the fallout and mistook composure for emptiness. He didn't understand that I came from people who can straighten a tablecloth and a future at the same time. My name is Zuri, not a synonym for compliant, not a placeholder for she'll swallow it. Zuri, which in my grandmother's tongue meant good, and in my daily practice meant not afraid. I made tea the way my mother taught me. Boil first, then pour. Opened the back door to let the day in, and wrote the next line in my notebook. Phase 3. Accountability, not spectacle. Because this was never about revenge. Revenge wants a camera. Accountability wants a record, then a better normal. I updated my resume, not because I felt replaced, but because I am a woman who keeps her own keys. I sent 3 careful emails to mentors who know the difference between scandal and smear. I texted our landlord, who'd always liked me because I fix things and pay on time, to confirm the lease language and the name on the utilities, both mine. I pulled the last set of boxes from Riverbend, wiped down the storage unit, and closed the account with a receipt in my files. Loose ends, cut, tied, labeled. Late that evening, my phone lit with messages. We need to talk. You went too far. This isn't you. The thing about people who write your downfall is that they believe they also direct your comeback. I muted the thread and slept. In the morning light, Pinecrest looked unchanged. Students at the bus stop, joggers pacing the hill, a neighbor waving with a leash in one hand and coffee in the other. But inside my life, the geometry had shifted. I no longer moved around their moods. I moved around my plan. The work you do after a breach decides the kind of story you live in. They tried to cast me in tragedy. I chose audit, of boundaries, of systems, of who gets to name me in public and in private. By week's end, even people who didn't know the plot could feel the weather change. Khalil still hadn't spoken. He didn't need to. Men who play chess with people's livelihoods rarely narrate the board. They wait for you to tip your king. I didn't. I stood up, closed the notebook for the day, and let the next phase arrive without fanfare. This wasn't their show anymore. Friday broke clean and bright, the kind of morning that makes a city look honest. I wasn't interested in pretty. I was interested in proof. At 9:12 a.m., a process server stepped into Pivotworks, the co-working loft where Khalil rented a desk. He was served in the hallway outside a glass conference room. Petition for dissolution, supporting affidavits, exhibit tabs like a small library, screenshots, logs, timelines, a neat index of Project Clean Slate and the business pitches he'd fired at my partners while sharing my dining table. Somebody held the door as he stood there reading. The courtesy made the moment feel even plainer. He tried on a smile that never reached his eyes. At 9:47, a second server visited Taryn at the leasing office she managed. Lobby flowers perfect, smile training wheels off. She accepted a packet that wasn't gossip, wasn't a threat, a formal notice documenting her use of company vehicles, staff time, and access logs to coordinate a personal campaign. Not from me directly, from her employer, who had already placed her on administrative leave pending outcome. The process server added my civil filing, harassment, conspiracy, a request for injunction. Procedure, not spectacle. At 10:21, Renee stepped out behind a boutique floral studio, hair wrapped, apron on, phone tucked in her waistband, and met a courier who handed her a slim envelope, a demand to cease misrepresentation, and a preservation letter instructing her to retain all communications about the staged surprise. 2 clients watched from inside among buckets of eucalyptus and ranunculus. She read fast. Color left her face like a tide. Opal was the last, not because I saved her for dessert, but because government runs on clocks of its own. Just after lunch, a courier arrived at her door with a small stack. Acknowledgement from the State Licensing Board opening a compliance review into her late husband's firm, a city tax inquiry, and an HOA letter about unreported commercial use of a residence for repeated large-scale events. On top, my counsel's letter of intent outlining claims tied to her coordination role, with attached excerpts from the signal thread, names masked where the law required, timestamps visible where the truth demanded. My phone lit up within the hour. First Renee, voicemail wet with panic, promising apologies and context. Then Taryn, voice pitched high around the words private and family. A text from Opal arrived composed as a church bulletin. Let's be adults. We need to talk face to face. And finally Khalil, measured, almost tender. We don't have to scorch the earth, Zuri. We can still work this out. I put the phone face down, brewed ginger tea, and updated the timeline. Phase 4, service and separation, with times, locations, outcomes. Documentation is a kindness to your future self. By late afternoon, the ripples widened. HR at my former job called to check in. I thanked them for the call and requested a copy of the internal memo about my exit, noting the date and the recipients. My attorney asked for it too. People confuse politeness for surrender. They shouldn't. I spent an hour doing small ordinary things with militant care, scanned receipts, labeled folders, opened a P.O. box, redirected my mail, confirmed again that the lease and utilities carried my name, took photos of the house contents room by room for an inventory. None of it was dramatic. All of it was power. Near sunset, Pinecrest softened, kids on bikes sketched lazy figure eights, someone grilled, a saxophone practiced 2 streets over. Inside, the air felt different. Not empty, available. At 7:03, a car door thudded outside. Then another. Footsteps on the walk. When I opened the blinds, I saw the 4 of them on my porch. Khalil in a sport coat that had seen better interviews, Taryn clutching her phone like a rosary, Renee with red-rimmed eyes, Opal composed to the edge of cracking. I let the knocking travel the length of a minute. Then I opened the door and stepped onto the threshold, so the evening light fell between us like a line on the floor of a stage. Khalil spoke first, voice careful. Zuri, this got bigger than it needed to be. It got exactly as big as your plan, I said, even. It just finally had witnesses. Opal lifted her chin. We made mistakes. We were trying to protect our son from a marriage that wasn't working. We didn't intend. You intended everything in the thread, I said. What you didn't intend was consequence. Tell us what you want, Taryn blurted. Money. A statement. What? I breathed once, slow, so my answer would be clean. I want boundary and record. Which is what I've made. No shouting followed. No reunion, either. Just the truth settling between us as the porch light flicked on. I won't be discussing this here, I added, stepping back. My counsel will be in touch about logistics. Please leave my property. Renee's voice cracked. Zuri, please. I met her eyes. There is a mercy that kisses a wound and a mercy that stops the knife. I chose the second. Good night, I said and closed the door. Behind it, my heart beat steady. I locked the deadbolt, set my mug in the sink, and wrote the last line of the day. Phase 5. Aftermath. Accountability to restoration. The night held. No sirens, no spectacle. Just a house that was mine and a future I would build on documentation, not debris. A week passed like rain you can hear from inside. Steady, inevitable. The phone stopped buzzing. The porch stayed quiet. Pinecrest went on with its morning joggers and late buses, and I went on documenting, repairing, and choosing what would come next. Khalil faded from the house the way steam leaves a mirror. A mutual friend told me he'd moved his laptop into a borrowed hatchback and was parking near free Wi-Fi to send proposals that now read desperate instead of strategic. The co-working loft Pivotworks suspended his badge while they reviewed member conduct. The slick one-pagers he'd mailed around lost their shine once people realized the discount came bundled with someone else's playbook. I didn't campaign against him. I didn't have to. Consequence does not need a publicist. Taryn's administrative leave stretched into pending termination, the kind of limbo that teaches you how long an hour can be. The property company boxed up her desk plants and framed quotes and reminded her, gently and in writing, that company vans aren't for private sting operations. Her leasing discount evaporated with her status. A notice went up that she'd need to vacate by month's end. On social, she posted a black square and a caption about growth. Comments were off. Renee's calendar chilled. The cautious advisory I'd written, names redacted, facts intact, kept doing quiet work. People with children and elders don't roll dice on vendors who think spectacle is a deliverable. She offered to cater a few events free for exposure, but exposure doesn't keep food cold or contracts honored. By Thursday, she'd taken nights at a diner. I hope the tips are kind. Everyone deserves a way forward. But forward and uncalled for harm can't share a seat. Opal learned the choreography of compliance. The state board asked for filings. The city requested records. The HOA wanted a calendar of events and parking logs. The philanthropic boards that once listed her on their mastheads quietly replaced her name with the phrase vacant. When I saw her across the lobby at a bank, she looked smaller, not in height, but in the way someone looks when their echo has finally met a wall. Inside my home, the air rearranged itself. I woke without bracing. I watered the prayer plant and watched its leaves lift like hands opening. I made coffee, opened windows, and walked room to room taking inventory photos I might never need but now owned like armor. I kept every screenshot, every receipt, filed, dated, labeled, and then I stopped rereading them. A record is a tool, not a pillow. Work found its hinge. 2 mentors replied within hours to my quiet emails. One asked for my resume and calendar. Another sent a link, a short-term contract designing community trust playbooks for small orgs shaken by leadership messes. I could do it in my sleep, except I wouldn't, because sleep is sacred again. I registered a small consultancy with a name my grandmother would like, set up a separate account, and built a one-page site that said exactly what I do. Crisis clarity for people who tell the truth. The legal part moved like legal things do. Papers filed, replies due, date set. My attorney, a woman who collects verbs, not trophies, called to say the injunction went through and the temporary orders on property and communications were granted. You built a thorough record, she said. I smiled into the receiver and said what my mother always said when the pot finally boils. That's what water does. On Sunday evening, 7 days after they'd stood on my porch like a chorus looking for a lead, they didn't come back. They didn't call. Nobody left a note. The silence outside matched the quiet inside and, for the first time in months, I realized I couldn't hear my own pulse in my ears. I put on a record and cooked pasta with too much garlic, the way I like it when I'm not auditioning for someone else's taste. I ate at the counter and let the house feel like a house again. Walls that protect, windows that frame sky, floors that remember steps. When the song ended, I wrote one final line beneath the last page of my notebook. Not revenge. Restoration. I tore out the page, placed it on top of the neat stack, phase 1 through 5, and slid the bundle into the fireproof box with my passport, my birth certificate, my spare keys. Then I turned off the kitchen light and stood for a heartbeat in the glow from the hallway, the kind of soft gold that makes ordinary things look like proof. Tomorrow I'll send 2 invoices, take a call about a workshop, and buy a new doormat that says welcome, with boundaries. Tonight, I will sleep in a home that is mine and wake in a story I chose.